Alrighty, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Other people might kind of roll in. I know Fridays in particular, it's hard to get moving. My parents came to pick up my daughter today. She was still in her PJs. She's very independent minded, so it took a minute. All right, so what I'm gonna do for the first week-ish of class is actually call roll, so that I make sure I get your names down. And then after that, I should be able to just check you off as you come in. I do have a picture roster. However, for a lot of you, this was your first year ID picture, and not all y'all look like this anymore. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to walk you through our Blackboard page a little bit more, and then we'll get started on our first lecture. So is Sue here? I don't think I saw her come in. Okay, Brittany? Paula? All right, Katie, Jade, Elijah, Trinity. Yeah, see, your hair is totally different than on here. So, Ariana, Allie.
I don't think I have a picture.
You don't, but that's okay. Brecken, Michaela. Alrighty, Jada, Griffin, Jasmine, awesome. Kira, or is it Kyra? Kira. Okay, I had it right the first time. I second guess myself on names a lot, so, and then Riley, awesome. Y'all are great. I'm so looking forward to this semester. One thing I realized I didn't tell y'all, but they might have figured out if you've had previous people you know take this class, is that the course number has changed for this class. This used to be Psych 285. It was just too much for a 200 level course. It wasn't fair to be giving it a 200 level credit, and people really struggled. So we changed it to a 300. And I think that more adequately reflects the amount of work and just thinking for having y'all doing in this course. So. Alrighty, so I have this in student view so that you can see everything. Syllabus is here. If you ever lose your copy or you're just like out and about and you're like, shoot, when was that due? You should be able to pull this up on your phone. My info is here, including that Calendly link. I know some people have already been setting up appointments with you. Awesome. I also know that some of you have me for this class and then also have me for ethics and professional issues. You could just set up one meeting, just make it one of the longer ones, and we'll count it for both classes. The Zoom info is here. I'm gonna always sign in on lecture days so that I can make the recordings for y'all. I did not have y'all do the first day of class poll. That's okay, we'll roll with it. Just forgot. If I have announcements, they'll be here. There's one from 2020 y'all don't need to worry about, that I'll delete. I have our discrimination statement or non-discrimination statement that's also on your syllabus. And then these are something that don't fit well on the syllabus, but are something that was provided to faculty by the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities that I think are really helpful for class discussions. So one person talks at a time, that seems obvious. Using I statements, particularly if we're talking about controversial issues, try to be like, well, I feel rather than you or those people, wherever they are, right? Maintaining confidentiality. If someone brings up something in class that's personal, don't go share it with everybody else around campus. Also, this isn't a great place to talk about, say, like your roommate's issues. Pretty small campus, people will figure out who that person is, right? So just knowing that. Practicing purity of motive. So don't assume someone's being malicious if they say something stupid. I mean, it's possible they are, but it's also possible that they're just ignorant, or sometimes like me, they just misspoke, right? And part of that is ouch, then educate. I will always try to be the person who does this, but if I miss something, please feel free to jump in. That if someone says something offensive, they're like, ooh, that's problematic. Here's why that's hurtful to me, and explain it. Or hurtful to others. Sharing the air, making sure that everybody gets a chance to share their opinions. And then taking responsibility for what you say and how you say it. This is something I still have to do. I was on a meeting with a bunch of psychologists and I talked about, well, how when there's a lot of people in the room, it gets claustrophobic. Like that's stigmatizing language, right? I shouldn't be using that. So I immediately caught myself and said, I'm sorry for using stigmatizing language, things along those lines. So, and give you a quick example of the ouch, then educate. This is like 6 years ago now. I had a very well-meaning student who just had her own really strong opinions about mental illness say, I just think that like people who are depressed and anxious need to go outside and take a walk and that'll make them all better. Yeah, I see lots of shaking heads, right? Like it'll certainly probably help depending, right? But like I had several students who struggled with anxiety and depression themselves. I've never experienced this in the middle of the class, like 3 or 4 students got up and left the room. Like it was that harmful to them. So I immediately did the ouch, then educate and was like, no, you know, that's not true. Let me give you the reasons why. Here's the science. So again, it wasn't from a malicious place. That was just truly something she believed. So sort of educating as well. I have the PDFs for all the notes here. So they come up with little slide notes next to them. Or if you prefer to just download the PowerPoints, you can do that as well. And then you can take notes in the notes section there. Or some people like to like copy paste the PowerPoints into a Word doc, take notes there, whatever works for you. Here's where those Blackboard readings are for discussion days. There are review sheets. I think these will be less helpful now that your exams are take home, but they still might help you kind of figure out what you might want to prepare for. Here's where your exams will be posted throughout the semester. I do need to go in and update basically just due dates on the take home essays. I will show some videos throughout the semester. So we've got some of these here. And then when we get to that simulation, all the stuff for that is here. All right, any questions about Blackboard, the syllabus, any of that good stuff going forward? Cool, and obviously y'all know you can always stop me, ask questions, all that good stuff. So, all right, and those of you who've had me before will be familiar with what I'm about to do now, but I have converted all of my slides to Google Slides because what I can do is turn on captions. And so it's not perfect. There will be times where it messes stuff up, but it is better than nothing at all. And, you know, helps with people who, you know, it usually helps to have some lip reading cues as well. So, all right. So for some reason over the years, I've taught this class quite a bit, but the very first page of my notes has disappeared into the ether. So I'm just going to do it from my laptop, like I'm a modern person and technologically advanced, even though I usually rely on this. All right, so today we're going to talk about what is personality. We'll also begin to delve into what a theory is. So the other half of the name of this course. And we'll start to talk about how to determine what makes a theory good or acceptable. I'm going to use a lot of air quotes in this class because like a lot of theory is very sort of personal preference. All right, so usually I ask you all on the first day to give me definitions of personality. I forgot to do that. So let's just shout some out. If you had to just define personality right now, what would you say it is? No wrong answers. Yeah.
Maybe not like technical definition, but like what are the traits that one person has that are really defined the person. Like every time you get up, like, oh, they're bubbly. Oh, they're
Right. Yeah. Traits seem to be a big part of personality. Yeah. And how we think about a person in general, right? Other ideas about what personality might be. Again, no wrong answers. A lot of times people will say something like something that influences what you do, right? Might influence your behaviors, or they'll say it's the things that make you kind of similar to what Jade said, the things that make you different from other people, things along those lines. So, it's something to kind of think about. And what you'll see as we go through today's lecture and as we go through the whole class is there are a whole bunch of different definitions. Basically, every theorist has their own definition of what personality is. So part of what becomes sticky here as we start to think about defining personality is how do we define any word? So I warned you all this is sort of more like a philosophy class than a psych class at times. This is a good example of that. So bird, how would you define the word bird? Again, no wrong answers. Beak and wings, yeah. What else? Yeah, Griffin.
Chirping.
Chirping, yeah. Other thoughts? What makes a bird a bird?
they can fly.
They can fly, yeah. But then what do we do with penguins and ostriches? And if we're thinking about birds as having wings, in the words of my undergraduate personality professor, Dr. Michael Levine, so maxi pads are birds, right? What is the essence of birdinity? What makes a bird a bird? This is tricky. What's the point? Why am I making you think about things like this? The point is to think about complexity and the fact that like a lot of things that seem obvious to us, like birds have a beak and wings and they fly, right? And they chirp, doesn't always apply, right? Some birds sort of scream, right? Things along those lines. And the word personality, as you can imagine, is even more difficult to define and very challenging to study and research. So all the concepts we'll be talking about all summer are difficult, all semester rather, are difficult to define, to study, and to research. So we'll see how the same ideas are explained in vastly different ways, and sometimes the exact same concepts are given different names by different theories. So a brief aside, I just mentioned Michael Levine. So we'll spend much of this course discussing people defined as great psychologists who have influenced our views on personality as a field. But I wanted to spend a couple minutes introducing you to two great psychologists who have influenced my own views of personality psychology, and to be honest, how I teach this course. So I mentioned Michael Levine. He was my undergraduate personality professor. He also served as an informal advisor to me, supervised me on an independent study. He's retired now, but he studied the prevention of body dissatisfaction and eating disorders. And he began his work as a psychologist studying type A personality. And he was very type A. He would like photocopy articles for us. This is before we had like Blackboard, aging myself. And sometimes they would be his personal copies. And when he underlined or highlighted, he used a ruler so that they were very straight. Okay. So this is, you'll hear me mention him several times, tell some fun stories about him. And then my graduate personality professor, and also the person who taught me how to teach. I took a class on college teaching when I was a graduate student, was Ben Newberry. He's also retired now. And he studied stress and health as well as behaviorism. So these two dudes influenced a lot of how I teach and also the stories I'll tell. I always try to attribute them and don't steal them as my own, but you'll hear their names. All right, so here are some of the definitions of personality from people we'll talk about throughout the semester. So, good old Freud. To him, personality was largely unconscious. It's hidden, it's unknown, it's outside of our conscious awareness. Skinner, who's a behaviorist, you may associate Skinner with pigeons and rats and doing very behavioral experiments. Skinner would argue it's an unnecessary concept. Skinner believed the mind was a black box. It didn't matter what happened in there. All that mattered is the stimuli we took in and how we reacted to it. Not a lot of modern psychologists would agree with either of these extremes, right? But it's important to kind of keep in mind. Allport, a trait theorist, which we'll talk about when we get there, like trait theory is kind of not a theory, it's just an empirical method. Anyway, we'll get there. But Allport said it's something real within an individual that leads to characteristic behavior, but also thought. So Allport was kind of combining ideas from both Freud and Skinner and a lot of other folks. So what is the origin of the word personality? It comes from the Greek persona, which means mask. So the idea is that we all kind of put masks on, and sometimes we control them, sometimes we don't, and that's how we present ourselves to the world, and that's part of our personality. So in your book, or at least an older version of your book, this exact quote was there. It's an individual's characteristic patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior, together with the psychological mechanisms, hidden or not, behind these patterns. So basically what personality is, and why this is an important class within psychology, is personality tries to explain why people do what they do, right? Which is one of the driving questions of psychology in general. Why do people act this way? You know, if we take it to the extreme, stuff that people find really interesting, why do serial killers kill, right? Why does someone with schizophrenia hear voices and react to them, right? Or it can just be, why did my friend do something really uncharacteristic when we were at that party last night, right? So personality theory helps to try to explain some of these things. And again, each theorist or theory we talk about will approach this in a slightly different way. So what is a theory and who cares? Why do we have not one, but two classes all about theory and psychology? So in addition to this one, we also have a course on theories of motivation. Well, theories, as we will discuss them in this class, are grounded in scientific enterprise. So this means that they are an attempt to understand things based on systematic, objective observation of whatever we're trying to define, the phenomena, if we want to call it that. So we're looking at systematic, objective observation. And we're looking at particular sets of rules. So a lot of times personality theories are sort of setting up rules for how we explain how people behave. If this happens, the person will do that, right? And this is as opposed to ask the Dalai Lama, right? So the idea is, or go ask your, that one dude you know for philosophy class seems to know everything. Right? So this is about scientifically looking at how can we explain things. So this is thinking about the word theory. It's used very differently in everyday speech, right? And how we sort of talk about things. So if you all heard someone say, like, when you're over in the caf, oh, I have a theory about that. What would you think? What would they be thinking of? How would they be articulating that? You think they're doing big scientific studies about it? What are they thinking? Where are they getting these ideas? Again, no wrong answers here, y'all, I promise.
It's just based on their personal experience.
Exactly, based on their personal experience, maybe like one thing they read somewhere. Some people it might be based on astrology, or like what they learned in InterPsych, right? Or just like what they've observed from people around them. Yeah, so when we think of the word theory in everyday life, it's sort of unfounded speculation, right? And it might become founded. But in science, a theory is a proposed explanatory system. I'll say it again because that's super wordy. A proposed explanatory system. So it is a way of scientifically explaining what's going on, right? And so if we go beyond psychology, right, we have theories about gravity, right? We have theories of evolution. We will talk about evolution later in the class related to personality and behavior. So it can be spectacular. It can be all-encompassing. And some of the people we'll study, like Freud, did try to explain like all of human existence. But theories can also be kind of small and explain one little thing. So the example I often give is a theory that a lot of my work is grounded in, and it's called objectification theory. And this is that idea that women in particular, but unfortunately more and more people of any gender in our society, view things like advertisements, social media posts, think about Instagram with all the filters, right? So often, and see how much people's bodies are sort of commodified, that eventually becomes internalized and they start to turn themselves into an object. And if you see yourself as an object rather than a functioning human, you're going to treat yourself really differently. You're going to feel differently about yourself. And so it's linked to things like not only body dissatisfaction, but depression, sexual dysfunction, things along those lines. So that's really only trying to explain kind of a teeny part of what goes on, right? But again, other theories are going to be big and sweeping and try to kind of explain all of existence. Or at least, in the case of personality theories, all of human existence. So a theory is basically a set of constructs held together by a set of statements. So a set of constructs held together by a set of statements. And y'all might be like, okay, what the heck is a construct? So I'm going to do the like high school paper thing and give y'all the Merriam-Webster definition. But I think it's just helpful. So some of them aren't as helpful. So the first definition is actually something constructed by the mind. Okay, that's circular. A construct is constructed, right? So a theoretical entity, a working hypothesis or concept, right? That seems to make more sense. So a concept is a construct. It's an idea. And then the second definition is a product of ideology, history, or social circumstances. Privacy is more than a social construct, for example. So construct just means concept. It's our way of looking at an idea. So something like depression is a construct, right? It's something that exists in nature, but we as humans have tried to define, right, and put a name to. So theories in psychology, like those in other disciplines, math, physics, what have you, they are all going to entail a set of rules around those constructs. So the set of statements are the set of rules, how those constructs relate to one another. So this is a quote from Kervin trying to explain this. So a theory is a set of assumptions and explanatory concepts that tie together various empirical findings are research findings, and suggest new relationships among them that we should obtain under different defined circumstances. So basically, it's a way of explaining how these ideas relate. So again, if we go Freudian, we think back to what we learned about Freud in InterPsych, right? Freud thought if you have some sort of developmental issue, right, and you kind of get stuck at one of the stages, that will cause you to develop a construct later like depression, anxiety, hysteria, something like that. And so what we're going to see and what I mentioned on the syllabus is that, we're going to cover a lot of theories in this class, but we're still not going to cover all the theories, right? Because we can only get through so many. So how do we decide which theory we want to use? So there are theories about how to use theories. What makes a good theory? It's all very meta sometimes, y'all. So Maddie was an existential psychologist and argued that there are two overall approaches to define personality theories. So benevolent eclecticism is the idea that all theories are good and all theories contribute to scientific knowledge, and we could kind of rate them all about equally. We get to therapies, sort of the application of theories. This is sometimes known as the dodo bird hypothesis. This is from Alice in Wonderland. The dodo bird says, all have won and all deserve prizes, right? So the idea that everything's just about as good as the other. And then there's what Maddie referred to as partisan zealotry. And the vast majority of the people we will study this semester who came up with theories were partisan zealots, because if you develop a theory, you're going to be really into it, right? And so they tout their preferred theory, and sometimes they'll actually put down the other theories. So again, thinking about this from like a therapeutic point of view, my major conference that I go to every year is the Association for Cognitive and Behavioral and Cognitive Therapies. And there are many different variations of those types of therapies. And they'll often try to do panels where they pull together people from different areas. And so I remember going to a panel where we had, a big name in behavior therapy, a big name in cognitive behavioral therapy, and then the big name in acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, which kind of incorporates mindfulness and some other things into therapy. And the behaviorist and the cognitivist were both like, all these therapies work. There's research to show it. It's great. And the ACT guy was definitely a partisan zealotry guy. He was like, no, ACT works better than everything else. Shouldn't be using anything else. And I was like, this just feels awkward on like what's supposed to be a collegial panel, right? So there are people who are just, their way is right and nothing else will work. So Newberry, my graduate professor in personality, came up with sort of a third one, and he said there can be malevolent eclecticism. And this takes theories as scientific theories and then examines what the theories offer about human psychology. And that's really the approach I take in this class. So we're going to talk about all these different theories, and we're going to talk about what works and what doesn't for every single theory we talk about. And Funder does a really good job with that. So I believe it's Funder's first rule is that every theory's strength is also its greatest weakness, right? And we're going to see that and pick apart all these theories as we work through this semester. So what makes a theory a good theory? What makes a theory something we should use to try to define behavior, or say one theory is better than the other theories? Well, we're back to good old Pervin that we mentioned a couple slides ago. And Pervin talked about a whole host of these sort of check boxes, basically, that might make a theory better than another. So parsimony, this is something we'll see come up over and over in sort of how we evaluate things. The idea with parsimony is basically the simplest explanation is often the best. So Pervin said there's elegance in simplicity and directness. The idea is that we don't need to unnecessarily complicate things. Oftentimes, just explaining something in the way that makes the most sense is going to be the one that actually is a theory that applies and works. Comprehensiveness is trying to explain as much as possible. Is your theory comprehensive? Is it trying to explain all of personality, right? Or is it like a justification theory, just narrowing in on one little piece? And you might be thinking, wait, aren't sometimes the first two in contrast to each other? Yes, right? So this becomes tricky about trying to determine what's a good theory. Syntax is the clarity and logic of the relationships between those constructs and how those are proposed and explained. So is the way that the theory is explaining the relationships between the constructs, does it actually make sense? Or is it way out there? Or is it too hard to follow? Right, kind of goes back to parsimony a little, but it's more about, is it logical? Semantics are the ease with which you can take these abstract ideas from the theory, the abstract construct from the idea, and translate those into observable behaviors. Sometimes we call this operationalizing. So you'll hear the word operational definition, and that's defining something in such a way that it can be measured. Okay, so how easy is it to take the ideas in the theory, the constructs the theory revolves around, and put it into something we can observe, we can study, we can do research on? And that goes into our second one, which is for our next one on this list, which is falsifiability. Can the theory be tested empirically? Can we do research to see whether it's true or not? I've heard this defined as, does a theory have within it like the ability to disprove itself? And there are some theories we talk about where yes. There are theories we're going to talk about where there are just, the constructs are so out there that you cannot test them, right? And then that makes it really difficult to try to wrap it around. It also depends on the theory, how open they are to this falsifiability. There are theorists who will argue research is not part of our theory, so we don't need to do it. Empirical validity. So we're going to talk about this a lot more when we talk about research and assessment, but basically this means, is the theory applicable? You can have the best theory in the world, it sounds really pretty, it's simplistic, the concepts all work together, but if you can't take it and actually apply it to what people are doing, is it that good of a theory, right? And along those lines, utility. Is the theory actually useful, maybe to predict future behavior? Things along those lines. So I just mentioned Hunter's first law. We can talk about that here as well. So a theory's greatest strength is usually also its greatest weakness, and we'll talk about that throughout the semester. So Newberry had his own ideas about what makes a good theory, and again, you'll see some of these sort of overlap with what we just saw from Kervin. So formal clarity, basically to Newberry, this means when you read it, you have to be able to tell what the theory is actually saying. Like, is it written unambiguously? Is it easy to read and be like, I see what they're saying? This is not always the case. Some psychologists, I am not one of them, think the only way to show they're intelligent is to use as many SAT multisyllabic words as possible. And it makes it nearly indecipherable. My graduate advisor, who's like the person I look up to the most, one of the most intelligent people I've ever met, it took her years to be able to parse through the first chapter of a theory book. She's like, I just couldn't wrap my head around it. And it was because of this, that it was just not written unambiguously. It was really hard to follow. So Newberry argued it should be clear. You should read it and you should understand what they're talking about, right? Then he argued that you should have successful post-diction. The theory has to account for what we already know, right? So if you were writing a theory about human behavior and you didn't take into account that, like, humans have to eat, humans are social creatures that like to interact with each other most of the time, right? There are definitely times we all need our space. Then that's problematic. So we have to account for what we already know and existing data that are already out there. And then he argued that we need to, in psychology in particular, and in the other sciences, be using the scientific method here. So with the scientific method, we're going to start with symbolic theory. Okay, so we come up with a theory, we have ideas, it's hopefully gonna explain everything and make us super famous, right? All right, some people care about that, I don't know, but others care, right? Okay, so then from that, we're gonna get a specific testable hypothesis or prediction. So something that we can operationalize, actually design into some sort of research study to test. So again, let's take objectification theory and say, we have this big theory, try to kind of explain all of why women might experience more depression and eating disorders. And maybe our hypothesis is if women are exposed to objectifying images, then immediately afterwards, they'll feel bad about their bodies. And we have objectifying images, we show them, and then we have them fill out a questionnaire about body satisfaction. Okay. So what I just described was the hypothesis leading into the procedure. So we need to actually have a way to do the research. So are we going to do interviews? Are we going to just have people fill out questionnaires? Are we going to, do an experiment where we manipulate something? Are we going to do some of the modern tracking methods where people will, wear a Fitbit or use an app throughout the day and we see stuff in real time? We have to kind of think about how are we going to test this hypothesis? And from that, we get data. And we can analyze that data and it tells us whether or not that actually supports our hypothesis. If it doesn't, there are several things we can do. We can say maybe our procedure wasn't precise enough, right, to get at the question we want to get at. So we could redesign our procedure. Say maybe our hypothesis was incorrect. Maybe we need to come up with a variation. If we go through this process enough and these hypotheses are always not being supported, then we probably need to go back up and redesign our symbolic theory because the data isn't backing it up. Now, one of the things that gets people really frustrated and confused sometimes is that within science, a theory is never technically proved. We don't prove a theory. The most you can say is that we have data to support the theory or that we failed to disprove the theory. Why, you might be asking? Well, the idea is there's always the possibility that someone could come up with a better study and they would just slip something in there that disproves everything, right? So we are very cautious. Theories can be disconfirmed. So basically, this circles back to Funder's first law, that a theory should have within it the seeds of its own destruction. If there's no way to disconfirm it, it's somewhat meaningless. So if it's not refutable, if it's not something we can do this with and test and maybe disprove it, it's not technically science, and psych is a science. The social science, it straddles with natural sciences, but psychology is a science. And Newberry also included parsimony. He said this is a goal, that simplicity is a goal, but he said psychological theories rarely are parsimonious, largely because humans are very complex creatures, right? We have a lot going on. So why do we need this? Why are we teaching this whole class? Why am I philosophizing on the second day of class when you're like, it's Friday, I don't know if my mind can comprehend this, right? Well, a whole bunch of reasons. So, and again, here from my two professors, they each had their own ideas about this. So Levine said, theories allow us to simplify. It allows us to reduce that complexity down to something we can understand and try to explain, which goes into the second one, that it's explanatory. Theories help us explain what we observe. Again, why does a person do this? Why do people develop mental illness and others don't? Theories can also be predictive. So predicting new relationships, predicting what people will do, right? If I know a person is outgoing, then I might be able to tell you how they'll react in a new situation, as opposed to someone who's more introverted, right? Take someone introverted, you put them in a party, they might like find their one friend or the dog, right? And just sort of hang out. The extrovert might be floating around, getting to know everybody. And then heuristic, that this theories stimulate curiosity and they stimulate scientific investigation. So as a scientific community, as a people who are interested in figuring stuff out, theories are really important for that part of it. And then Newberry said, theories are important because they summarize things. Even a room full of data, we used to actually like print out our data sheets. If this whole room was filled with data related to a theory, I might be able to articulate everything I found in that data in a couple sentences with that theory. He also thought predictions were important here. The ability of a theory to make good predictions can have profound consequences. And it can have profound consequences for things we haven't seen yet or thought of yet, right? When theorists, even in the 70s, right, or the 80s, were coming up with things, they were never thinking about how social media impacts our lives or virtual reality, right, or whatever the heck the metaverse is, right? But good theories might actually be able to help us explain what's going on today with these new technologies. And then a sense of closure. You feel like you understand things when you get a good theory. It's comprehensive. A theory essentially becomes an explanation. The other reason why studying theory is really important is that we are all theorists. We naturally are making predictions, assessing, kind of trying to figure out everyone we interact with. People are naturally inclined to assess or get to know each other. And this kind of goes with the goals of science. The goals of science are to predict and explain things. Sometimes, though, the goals of science are also to control things, right? Which again can be used for good or evil. And so, if you know someone is very gullible, there are cases where people are taken advantage of because of that. But we look for non-random regularities in the people around us. Maybe they always seem to have a similar attitude about things, or they behave in a similar way most of the time. And we make judgments about each other based on those observations, right? So we think about how people are and who they are and how they act, and sometimes based on like one interaction with them. There's a great reading that you will do next Friday, where Nick Adams, one of the authors of the Pieces books, talks about being at a party and meeting someone for the first time and drawing a lot of conclusions about that, right? It's something we're all guilty of. Yeah.
So would you say like the first impression would be a fundamental?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it could be accurate, right? Or it could be a fundamental attribution error. And if y'all don't remember what the fundamental attribution error is, it's such a good point. It's the idea that we tend to think that things that we do are kind of influenced by what's going on around us, but things that other people do are because of something in them, their personality. The best example I give that's pretty obvious to understand is, let's say I watched y'all walk out of here and one of you tripped over the desk. I might be like, that person's clumsy, right? But then the next day I tripped over the desk and I'm like, who put that there? Right? That's the fundamental attribution error. But yeah, that can definitely come into play here. And we have to be really careful about that. So we as people come up with our own theories about why other people act the way they do and how they come to be this way. And so that's where that fundamental attribution error comes into play. It's the belief that our own errors are situationally caused, but other people's errors are part of their personality. Humans are also prone to jump to conclusions. Our brain actually works this way. It helps us make cognitive shortcuts because we process so much information every day. And so we tend to assume that people's behavior reflects on their personality, even though that person could just be having an awful day. Or maybe this is like one of the few times in their life this person's drunk, right? And that's their first time meeting them. So we're prone to jump or sometimes leap to conclusions, right? So in actuality, personality for ourselves and anybody else around us is a result of the interaction between the person and the situation they're in. So the idea is by seeing people across different settings or contexts, we would get a better example about their personality, a better idea. So a fun example here is if you all went to a party on campus and did what you're doing right now, sat down, took out your notebooks or your laptops and started taking notes, right? Everyone would be like, are you okay? Or they'd be like, is this for psychology class, right? Same thing, if you came in here and started dancing on the table, right? Then we might all be like, are they okay? Should we call someone? So the idea is that we need to take the situation into account when we're thinking about personality as well. All right, any questions about that? That gets you nicely confused for the day. Basically, the idea is that theories try to help us explain things in scientific ways. All right, we finished up a couple minutes early today, so I will send you off to your weekend. And I will see you all on Monday morning. We'll start talking about some research methods.